So we've heard from some economic aspects of them, but we also have some health elements to this. Trees, for example, reduce the pollutants that trigger respiratory disorders by trapping and removing lung-damaging dust, ash, pollen, and smoke. And there's a number of elements to research that have shown us that asthma incidents increase in urban communities where trees are actually eliminated. For example, in New York, they're currently doing a project called Million Trees New York City. And they're planting trees for public health. So whoever would have thought that would be a public health initiative, but this is what they're actually doing. And they're planting these in neighborhoods where they have shown higher average asthma rates among young people. So by providing this type of experience of having these trees available in these neighborhoods, the goal is to hopefully be able to reduce some of that incidence of asthma. And when we realize that there is a cost associated with this, the American Lung Association estimates that ozone-associated healthcare costs in America is about 50 billion, yes, that's with a B, billion a year. So there's huge cost associated with this. When we think about the health value of a tree, we also have to think about it from a green space perspective. Now, we're very fortunate in Watertown to have sidewalks on every street in our town. And we have many shaded sidewalks. And these encourage physical activity and getting people outdoors to be physically active. And as many of you may know, physical activity is one of the foundations of good health. Studies have shown a correlation between community forests and the amount of physical activity exerted by residents. Many of you are aware of the incidence of obesity, which continues to rise in our country. And health care costs associated with obesity top $100 billion a year. These are real dollars that are coming out of our healthcare dollars. And obesity, in many cases, is another chronic disease that can be prevented. And physical activity is one way to be able to do that. When we think about the health value of a tree, we may not necessarily think about it from a stress or a noise perspective. But if you go back to Ken's photo of those two streets with the one with no trees and one with trees, they're actually, which street would you rather live on? I think we know. But which one would make you calmer and less stressed? Because stress and noise actually have an impact on both our physical and psychological health. Trees can affect our mood and relieve stress. When you go on vacation, where do you go? Do you go to the mountains? Do you go to the forests? Do you go to the ocean? You go to a place where there's nature, because our problems feel really small when you're there looking at those trees or that ocean or that big mountain. So we go to nature as a way of relieving our stress and to help improve our mood. Trees have a restorative quality that help people feel and function better. When you go for a walk, just think how much better you feel. It's been proven through research that patients who see trees outside their hospital rooms have a shorter recovery time and have required fewer painkillers. So there's some great research, and it actually was done from here in the Boston area. And research has also been done with office workers. So look out the window of your office. Where do you work? Can you see any trees? Workers who have seen trees from their desks reported higher levels of satisfaction with their jobs and better overall health. And then finally, let's think about the kids, because the kids are our next generation. And we're bringing up kids that we want to have as healthy, physically active, and well-adjusted. Research from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, showed that girls and greenery go together. Higher self-discipline in girls can be achieved through increased exposure to nature, resulting in a pursuit of healthy, more successful behaviors. So they're less likely to undertake risky behaviors. And kids have also been shown to have better concentration skills as a result of spending time outside and end up paying more attention when they're inside. So if we can get more recess back into our school days, get kids out running around and playing, we're going to see that they might actually have better test scores because they have been out playing and getting into green space.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name is Peter Deltredici. I live at the corner of Riverside and Irving Street. I've lived in Watertown for over 30 years now, so I'm a relative newcomer compared to Brandon. And you know, my house, it stands out like a sore thumb because over the 30 years that I have lived there, I've managed to plant quite a few trees. So there's this tree island in the middle of the street that has very few trees on it. I work at the Arnold Arboretum, and I also teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And many of you know I spoke to the Trees for Watertown meeting last year, and I think it was back in 1982. I was one of the founding members of Trees for Watertown with Meg Crawford. So what I'm going to do is just really talk about how trees make our world more habitable. If you don't mind if I stand up, would you make it much easier for me?
Stay close enough to a microphone.
Oh, I think you can hear me, right? Can everybody hear me? I've got a loud voice. So let's just go to the next slide. I wanted to show you this because one of the things that's happening in our world, as everybody knows, is urbanization is a major force in transforming the world, along with globalization and climate change. This is a map of the Northeast and shows this is a population, I think it's 500 people per square mile. And that, you know, this gives you some idea of the extent of urbanization in the Northeast. And trees are one of the major ways of combating the negative impacts of urbanization that urbanization has on our environment. The next slide will show you. And you know, this is the global impacts of what trees are doing. So not so much in our neighborhoods or in terms of property values, but just at an ecosystem level. So obviously everybody knows, you know, we would die without plants because they produce the oxygen that we breathe. Carbon fixation. All of the CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere as a result of the burning of fossil fuels. Trees are incredibly efficient at taking up that carbon. If the tree is healthy, it stores it in its tissues, it stores it in its root system, and it essentially is taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Soil built up over time. People don't realize, but that the soil, you know, if you have a tree in your yard, you realize that the soil level builds up very, very slowly. If you live long enough, you can actually begin to see inches of extra soil added over time, and that is a carbon storage place. So the buildup of soil is incredibly significant. Water circulation from the soil to the atmosphere. We know that trees play a major role in regulating the climate, and when you cut down the trees, as they have done in large parts of the Amazon, essentially rainfall disappears. They promote increased groundwater infiltration by increasing soil porosity. The next slide. Those are sort of at the ecosystem level. And at the local level, they control erosion on steep slopes, stream and riverbank stabilization. You will take a walk down by the Charles River occasionally. Without those trees along the banks of that river, we'd be in real deep trouble without those trees holding it. Obviously, food and habitat for wildlife. This is, you know, this is the food supply for all wild animals. It's critically important, and trees play a major role in that. Excess nutrient absorption in wetlands, okay? One of the impacts of urbanization is we put a lot of chemicals into the environment, salt being one of them, excess phosphorus, and excess nitrogen end up in many of our wetlands. And trees, along with other plants, are very effective at removing these pollutants that would otherwise be very difficult to get out of the water stream. Heat reduction in both paved and unpaved areas. This is a major impact that trees have on the urban environment. That comes up in those economic calculations. They really cut down on air conditioning costs in the summertime, and by cutting down the wind in the winter, they can reduce heating costs. Soil, air pollution tolerance in urban areas. As I said, we are pouring chemicals everywhere in our urban environments, and trees have a remarkable capacity to tolerate that. And then, of course, a buffer against wind and noise. Now, I wanted to show this slide. Hopefully it's not too much, but this is a transect that my colleagues at Boston University did. They started at downtown Boston, and he drove 70 miles out to the Harvard forest. This is in kilometers. to Harvard Forest and Petersham. They went right out Route 2. And this is on the vertical axis, this is the amount of impervious surface that they ran into as they went out. And you can see here, here's Route 95. When they crossed Route 95, all of a sudden, when you have about 25% of the soil is covered with impervious pavement, that is an urbanized condition. That is pretty remarkable. So essentially, even though we may think we live in the suburbs, we actually live in an urbanized area. So from a point of view of the environment, urban is defined by the amount of impervious pavement that exists. So that's a really important concept. And that figure of 25% really represents a good goal for how much tree canopy we should have to counteract the negative impacts of that impervious pavement. And speaking of impervious pavement, I did want to pick up on the real estate aspects. This is a street in Watertown that shall remain nameless, but this is one of the big problems is the absence of curbs. And for many years, it turns out Watertown has not had a good guidelines about how streets should be designed. That has finally been corrected, and Watertown now has a good set of guidelines of how to build streets such that curbs are added, because without curbs, we can't protect these trees. So that's a really important issue that hopefully Susan will have something to say about a little later.
Okay, your last one was demonstrating.
My last one.
Progress
Yes.
does happen.
Progress can happen, yes.
And we can come back to who wants one of these later on. Next, Lee Forrest.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. I'm a professional landscape designer, and currently I work for City Sprouts. I've been working for them for 6 years, in which we work with children in schoolyard gardens in Cambridge. And I'm also an Episcopal priest. And what's wonderful is all these years I finally have come to a place of integration, that I can both be a priest and a professional landscape designer every day of my life. I also want to say that Judy Fellows and I are like captains of creating the community garden on Nichols Avenue, and it's been a pleasure working with Judy. So the subject of my short little speech is the value of trees for our learning and how we relate to the larger world. And as I prepared this, I was thinking about respect. How do we learn about respect? And this slide is of a tree that I saw in Costa Rica on vacation. And this is actually the dry section of Costa Rica. But on another day, we were hiking and we were in a rainforest. And there was a path, and we walked around in a circle. And what we were doing was walking around a tree that was a good 16 feet in diameter. And my response was, this is a cathedral. And if I talk too much, I'm going to cry. But it was so massive, I couldn't even see the top of it. And if I was trying to explain my feeling, it was respect and awe. The next slide is a Tiffany window. And this references tree as an archetype. And I want to quote from the New Testament, last book, Book of Revelation. Then the angel showed me the river of life-giving water, sparkling like crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of its street. On either side of the river grew the tree of life that produces fruit 12 times a year. Once each month, the leaves of the trees serve as medicine for the nations. Now, about 5 years ago, I worked in a local Episcopal church, and I gathered kids together to make a banner in celebration of Pentecost, which is about this time of year. And so we made a big banner, and we made this picture of a tree with all the leaves and sparkles on the leaves, healing all the nations. And there was this one boy that added to it, let's make lemonade. And for me, it was a metaphor that of hope, to think that we could have something tangible in this world that gives us hope. To imagine a tree that would heal all the nations not just ours or China's, but all of them, is a great sense of hope. And for me, I realized as I prepared this, I didn't go from there to the metaphor of a particular divinity figure. It was the tree. I stayed right with the tree. I want to also mention, almost by title, that a group of people formed a healing project, and it's called the Healing Tree Project, after 9/11, in which they decided to create living memorials by planting trees. And they selected 5 different kinds of trees to represent, where is it? Different qualities. So for instance, an elm is about respect, or a pine is resilience. So I have it posted over there if you'd like to look at it. So I mentioned children. I work for City Sprouts and I enjoy teaching them about the natural world because as Peter was talking about the urbanization, what it means is a lot of children have no access to trees, or let alone vegetables or fruit. So I enjoy teaching them. So yesterday I brought in some leaves of my elm tree and some leaves of my Japanese maple. And they were exploring those, and they found an inchworm. So maybe we're at the American elm picture. So I've learned that you have to relate to our neighbors here in Watertown through our trees. When we moved in, this American elm, which is on the southwest side, i.e. it's a great shade tree, one major branch was on the neighbor's property. So 10 years ago, Leslie and I took out that branch immediately. But fast forward a few years, we turn to the next one. This is the front of our house, and this is a red maple that you're looking at. And to the left, or anyway, is our neighbor. She hates this tree. She doesn't like the pollen that affects her black car.
She never met a tree she liked.
So one day I walked out of our house and there was a tape around that tree, and it was going to be taken out the next day. And I was so horrified because I respect and love this tree. It gives beauty. And what I learned from this encounter with her is I can get angry really fast over this, and that she had no respect of this tree, and that she reminded me of a lot of kids I know in the public schools because they've never been taught how to take care of trees or what it's like to climb in a tree. So every year, Leslie and I prune this tree hard. It's a pretty hard job. And in closing, I could say so many things. What I want to say is, I think it's important for us to teach our children so that they know about trees and take care of them. I think it's also important for us to be very clear as a municipality about the responsibilities of taking care of a tree on the border. Who can take out a limb or not? And in the case of this red maple, it was on the property line and could not be said it's hers or it's ours. So I hope that there's nice curriculum in this school district to teach children respect of trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
My name's Elizabeth, and I'm a Watertown parent and a new Trees for Watertown member. I was asked to talk about the perspective of children and the schools as related to this question of what is a tree worth. I'd like to share some of the creative benefits of trees and nature to children, because some of the other people already talked about the health benefits, the benefits of helping children focus in schools, and the importance of learning about trees when they're young. But what I learned, and you could show the next slide, is that natural play areas encourage more fantasy and make-believe play. And they also, I think, form future nature lovers. As a parent, I've observed that children love trees in a different way than adults do. And I think this is really important for adults to think about, and for city planners, town planners, to really understand the way children view trees and what they really value about trees. The next slide So there's a book called The Last Child in the Woods that Mary, my children's preschool teacher, who's in the audience back there, if you could just wave, she teaches children at the Watertown Cooperative Nursery School and is a lover of trees. And she's the one who introduced me to this book. And I didn't read it until very recently, but I was really impressed by some of the points that the author makes about the importance of nature for children. Not only the importance of nature in terms of inspiring creative play, but also about helping them focus more, and children with ADHD can thrive a lot easier if they get outside. So one thing I wanted to point out with this slide is that we are seeing a lot of our natural areas disappear as we put in new fields, like for example the turf field. The photo on the bottom shows some of the local tree lovers in front of one of the trees that's going to be cut down. And I think it's important, and the author makes this point, that children are often drawn to the edges of parks for their make-believe play. And this is something that I think a lot of adults don't understand or realize in looking at our playgrounds and our parks, that those little ugly shrubs and messy areas that border a lot of our parks are what are like magnets to children and their play. Those areas become like the forbidden forest in Harry Potter's Hogwarts. So this next slide is, I have some points here that I think Watertown can do to encourage the next generation to love trees. I think the first two are really obvious, and everybody knows we need to plant more trees and shrubs. And that shade is really necessary at our playgrounds. We have wonderful playgrounds in Watertown, but a lot of them are not used in the summer because they aren't shaded. But in the third point, I just think that it's important for people to think about this issue from the child's perspective and to understand that we need trees for children to climb. And just last week, the favorite tree at Lowell School that children like to climb was cut down. So they no longer have the easy tree to climb. I think it's important to leave the sticks. A lot of our parks are very clean and tidy, but when children don't have sticks for stick war, they start breaking branches off trees and figuring out ways to do it. They really need those sticks. I think it's important to think about hiding places and shrubs and areas that maybe shouldn't be so neatly trimmed, but let them get a little bit wild so they can create forts and play in those shrubs. The Lowell School, I use that as my example because that's my world, but at the bottom of the Lowell School hill is this amazing shrub, and it's become a fort for children, but it's right along Orchard Street. So I've talked to a lot of people at Trees for Watertown about not only protecting children from that road, but trying to plant more of those shrubs and rhododendrons in other areas so that children have safer areas to play. I also would love to see, I've seen this in Boston in some places, swings hung from trees. I think children love to swing, but I think especially those swings belong under trees. And to see more gardens like you guys are already working on. I think one thing that's really important, of course, is more recess. And a lot of children don't get outside in the winter, and if there's rain, if it's muddy, children stay indoors, and that's a real problem in Watertown. And I think we should look at that policy and try to change that. And then also just to celebrate Watertown's strengths. I think instead of dwelling on the negative or always comparing Watertown to some of the more affluent communities, one thing that Watertown has that's really wonderful is that our children are less structured than some of the children in the more affluent communities. So our kids have, in theory, more playtime, more downtime, which is wonderful, and I think we should give them more natural play areas so that they can do more of that make-believe play. And adventure playgrounds, natural play gardens, this is something that's done in Europe with small abandoned lots. And this was an idea of Mary's. She works at the nursery school next to it's in a church with an empty lot next to it. And she's always wanted to have that turned into a natural play area for the children at the nursery school. So I'd love it if Watertown could focus on some of those abandoned areas and turn them into small, natural playgrounds. And of course, we need more curriculum about trees. So my last slide.